Now I want to touch on how all of these beats and the feels that you have in these beats can actually change the context of the riff, because it can do it really drastically. For example, I've got these pre-recorded riffs here, and these are actually with those two beats that I was showing you earlier. So we got this straight ahead thing going there, right? And although this doesn't work perfectly, and I would probably have to change a few accents around to match it either on the guitars or drums or both, just hear like how with a triplet feel it really... Now I did do this kind of backwards because I did those drums first and I kind of just jammed something stupid over the top. But I usually start with the guitar riff actually. And a lot of people do ask me this, if I start out with the drum pattern first. It's honestly 95% of the time it's a guitar riff that starts it off. And that's important. I always have a general idea of what I want, but that doesn't mean I don't experiment. Now, here's a very good example of what I'm talking about. I've actually pre-recorded a section of this old demo I have called Striswald. And it can kind of show you, so there's this basic idea, this sort of syncopated groove that's going on. And I programmed it so the groove changes a little bit throughout, but it's always the same basic idea on the guitar. It's really just the drums that are changing. So take a listen through. So as you can see there, that's pretty much the same thing. I'm adding in these little rakes on the guitar here, you know, just for effect. But the accents are all in the same place. And this is kind of important. So you'll notice that the kick and the snare, we get rid of all this ghost notey stuff here. Let's get rid of that for good measure too. And that's the kind of relationship that the drums, or the kick and snare specifically, have with the guitar. It's pretty consistent, and it's this sort of revolving pattern until... And the reason I wanted to show this riff is because this shows you sort of different ways that you can approach drumming or programming drums with syncopated feels. As I said earlier, drum beats, to me, are all about the interplay between the kick and the snare. So you can have something where the snare is sort of keeping time and the kick is following the riff. Or you could have something where the kick and snare are following the riff entirely, or the kick is and the snare's kind of falling around, like it is in this case. The snare's not really playing on anything. It's just kind of always following that same amount of distance after the last kick. That's the concept behind this. But, you know, this right here, we have that same kick accent, but now we've got a snare just doing this backbeat. I'd call this like a halftime feel. And I've got my pedal hat going here with eighth notes. And I've got a China, which I like to do kind of the really soft accent on in between. But really all you're hearing is just this. This is kind of filling in the gap so it's not so dry. And realistically, that's how I would play it, you know, just kind of that really soft accent as you're going for it. So that combined with these ghost notes here, if you remember me talking a little bit earlier about this, you can get that 16th note roll sort of happening between that. So if I deleted that, it sounds a little bit more empty. That might be what you want to go for. For this particular riff, I actually kind of like it with those ghost notes. One little thing I was going to talk about ghost notes here is, you know, this I have kind of on these upbeats. I guess these are 16th notes. I have them on the upbeats because that's what would kind of make sense. And if you're going for sort of a consistent thing, and depending on how good your drummer is, if you're programming this for a real drummer, making it sound realistic or whatever, I do find that, you see, you have technically 3 hits in a row here. That is a little bit tough. I would either not put that in at all, and that actually has a kick underneath it, so it's kind of unnecessary anyway. But this one here, for example, you kind of don't hear it. You could delete it, or you can make it really soft. And it's just that doing 3 hits in a row for some drummers can be like, you know, doing like a soft, hard, soft like that. That can be tricky. Matt can play stuff like that, so I always leave it in. But I find it doesn't sound as good or as realistic if that hit right before the snare drum is the same velocity. I always like to bring it down a little bit, just makes it flow a little bit better. And there's other ways to do ghost notes as well. I mean, you could really just put them wherever you want, really. Let's see how that works for you. If you like it. If you want to create some sort of rhythm with your ghost notes here, fill in some gaps. Doesn't really matter. It's whatever you want to do, and if you're programming this for a drummer, if they're happy to play it like that, you can create all sorts of different feels just with the ghost notes. It's kind of cool. Let's see. Then with this little fill here, anything that's fast, I'm always a little bit hesitant with leaving it at full velocity. I do like full velocity for kicks and snares. Doubles, as you'll see, will have like kind of this lead in, because that's kind of how I play, is that first it's a little bit softer, you know? You can do it however you want. But I always think it's a little bit more realistic to kind of have these not be full velocity. And again, the way I choose which one's like the sort of dominant hit is I just think of how I want it to sound, how I would play it, even do it slow, because that will really change the sort of the motion that a fill has. Now here I have this sort of, I don't even know what I would call this. There's probably a term for it. I don't know what it is, but it's like double time relative to the halftime. So halftime, you know, the snare would be like here, right? But and literally the only thing that's changed is just the placement of the snare drum. That's the only difference between that last riff and the first one. But you do hear how different it sounds. The programming's pretty much exactly the same. The only thing I think I've changed, and this is something to be aware of as well. So I'm not the hugest fan of having kicks and snare drums at the same time. You can do it if you want, and some people really like it. I just find that it's not necessarily the most realistic thing unless you're playing like a double bass groove and like your kicks are already going. A drummer, and at least the way I play, I'll tend to separate them. And you also get more clarity on each one. It's like the kick and snare eat into each other a little bit. So maybe for certain accents I would do it, but most of the time I'll just keep them separate. And the reason this is important is because, you know, you might have these pre-programmed grooves at the bottom, like for the kick lining up to the groove, and then once you change the snare drum from halftime to double time here, you'll end up with some snares that are lining up with kicks. What I like to do in that case is move the kick just back. So as you can see, like that's where the accent is, and that's technically where the kick should be. But I'd rather just have it right before on a 16th note, because it sort of leads into that one. And again, all I'm giving you here are just suggestions and little tricks I use sometimes. This is not something that works every time, and if you do it every time, it kind of takes away from how special it is when it does happen. So I wouldn't say to always do that. But it is kind of a cool trick that you can experiment with and something I like to do sometimes. Next subject. Now, I'm not exactly an authority figure on blast beats or anything, but I do think they're a lot of fun, especially when they're used in certain contexts. So I programmed a little something to show you how I go about programming different blast beats. Again, this is just my personal way of doing it. I'm sure there's 1.5 million different ways to do it, but let's start off with the traditional one. Again, all these beats have names. I'm not entirely sure what they are. It doesn't really matter to me because I just know what they sound like. So this is what I think is called a split blast. The idea on this one is that the snare drum is doing these sort of 30-second notes in between the kick drum. So I should just solo it. That's what you've got going there. And you're filling in the gaps. So it's like really, really fast. It's like doing a roll. And it's basically between the kick drum and the snare drum. And you're rounding it out with these ride hits. You can use hi-hat. Well, you can use really anything. Right now I'm using ride hits, which I happen to like to sort of do in between the bell and the tip. And those match up to every kick drum. Bam. And, you know, just with accents on there. So, I could totally play that. I can't play that. Into a fill right here. And for double bass parts, again, this depends, especially when you're doing with more extreme stuff, it depends on the aesthetic that you're after. Because if you want that sort of triggered kick sound, then by all means, just, you know, even it out like that. I try to sort of get this motion going around 4 notes, so it would be like, I can't really hear that. And with that in mind, the first one's hard, the second one's softer, the third one's a little bit harder, and then soft again. And I'm kind of just like inputting these sort of at random. It's not always the same, but I do find that makes it sound a little bit more natural. It does sound the way that a drummer plays. And it's these little things that just, I feel like having those accents on the 4 like that are kind of nice. So that, with this riff here. This right here, this is, I guess they're bomb blasts, I think. I don't know. It's probably not, but it might be. Anyways, this is where you have the snare actually on the same hit as the kick drum. So it's all just 16th notes here. Now I happen to actually accent the riff with these harder hits, as you can see here. It's kind of going between these sort of heavy ghost notes and sort of rim shots. Because I just think at this speed, it's probably really hard to actually get like full-on rim shots. But hey, it depends on the drummer. And it depends on the sound that you're after. You could, again, just go for full-on, just like, screw this. Like. But for this, I thought it would be kind of good to have those accents. I've also got this China. So I'm going between this crash here and trying to figure that's pretty easily, you know, just quick motion of the wrist right there for the drummer. And all the accents on the China, these are just filling in the beats. This is fun. This is like, I think I saw like Mario from Gojira do this kind of beat, and I loved it. Where you kind of do that same thing, but you're just getting this It's kind of like what you do with a hi-hat, actually. Like, you're just getting that first hit accent, second one soft hit, but on the snare drum, and then over, you know, double bass, which I've decided to go full on out. So and it's kind of a typical death metal fill here. 4 on the snare, 4 on the tom, 4 on the snare, 4 more on toms. Like that. Good fun. And in context, that sounds like. So the cool thing is, this is the exact same guitar riff here, but it just shows you how different it can be with a different beat. Exact same guitar riff. I added some little triplet kicks for fun there. Just because why not? And again, got that double bass going. That same sort of death metal feel there. So that's blast beats in a nutshell. Some cool little tricks. With the ride cymbal, it's a very percussive sound. And generally speaking, any sort of percussive sounds that are happening at exactly the same time, I like to move a little bit off the grid. Just makes it sound more live, because no drummer is actually going to hit that perfectly. So this is what I'm talking about. I'm going to delete this so you can hear a little better, but I don't know if you can hear, but that's not perfectly on. If it was perfectly on, it would sound like this. You can see them kind of move back on the grid. Sounds like a machine. Sounds a bit more realistic. And all I've done there, I'm sure your DAW has a feature like this, but in Cubase, what you do is you select what you want here. So in this case, this is the ride. And you can randomize by a few ticks. And depending on the speed that you're at, you probably want to use less. So for slower things, I might use as much as 11, or for flams, you know, on toms and snares at the same time, I might use like something as high as like 13 or whatever. For this, I think 3 or 4 should do the trick. So let's listen. And you can see them sort of randomly moving around there every time I hit it. Let's try a little more. Let's try 7. See how that's sounding pretty good there. So yeah. So I guess I probably used something more like 7 on that. Again, I don't really know what I'm doing with a lot of this stuff. It's just listening. It's just experimenting and listening till it sounds good. And that is probably the most important thing that you should take away from this. Now, with that in mind, when you do bomb blasts, which are over here, same thing. I actually move these snares a little bit off the grid, so you can see they're not right on, because I don't think that it sounds really good when the snare and kick are at exactly the same time. It just sounds like that's like one sound. So now every snare sample is a little bit off. It's interacting with the kick sample a little bit different. And if I were to grid that right on, sorry. It sounds almost phased. So these are the little sort of attention to detail bits that I like to do with blast beats. Some people will go as far as to even taking the snare part and kind of taking that off the grid. But you know, I actually like it when it's a little bit more on. But again, no rules with this kind of thing. Cool little trick if you can do this in your DAW. You want to just kind of get that right back in there. Bam. Do that like that. Now we're on 30-second notes. And then just lower the volume. And you have blast beats. Simple. This is why I like Cubase. And finally, now that I've sort of showed you how I approach my programming, I will say just observing drummers. That's probably one of the best things that you can do if you're really serious about it. If you want to be realistic, try to program some beats by your favorite artists. Try to see if you can recreate. And not just simple beats, but get all the ones that have the intricacies. See if you can do like Digital Bath by the Deftones, because that's got like a lot of really specific accents that really make the difference between the sort of core beat and what the final product sounds like. All those little ghost notes and getting it just right, like trying to follow exactly what Abe's doing on the recording. Those are just cool little tricks to see how drummers work and what their tendencies are. And that might build into your programming tendencies. So that's probably one of the best pieces of practical advice I can give you, because so much of this is just me reacting to what I'm hearing. There's no real formula to this. I've tried to give you guys some tricks here. I'd say the most important thing about what I'm showing you here is just understanding the program well enough to where you can actually get the ideas that are in your head out into your song. And that way, the rest is just creativity, and that will just be you. That'll be how you interpret it. So I hope that the distinction's been made clear. I'm just trying to show you a couple tricks that I know, but you know, feel free to not follow any of them, because you might come up with something way cooler.